That opening gave the audience a view of the stage, the action of the players on the stage. But the interesting thing about it was how the Italians went about structuring these environments, these three-dimensional sets on the stage. And it took work. Side wings, overhead borders, backdrops, things that would provide that depth, that perspective, that fixed point, vanishing point on the back wall that created that. Changing all of this around took time. Um, and in between acts of a play is when that happened. It took time, it took people, it took coordination. Eventually, these set changes evolved into something called intermezzi. Sounds like intermission. Yes, well, this is what happened. But the intermezzi, the changing of the scenery, was accompanied with music. Sometimes they even added a small narrative to the changing of the set, and it became quite interesting. Eventually, this intermezzi evolved into opera. Fascinating that this is the progression, but for the Italians, opera was the highest form of entertainment, performance entertainment. It was grand, it was beautiful. For that reason, in Venice, opera houses were constructed to accommodate these wonderful, beautiful works of music and performance. In terms of theater, the Italians contributed something, a style of comedy called Commedia dell'arte, and I posted some videos that will take you through the whole Commedia story. It's fascinating. The beauty of Commedia is that Commedia, the performances are improvised. They're all improvised. And the way it works is Commedia characters are all what are known as stock characters. And there are three categories: masters, lovers, and servants. Um, the videos explain all of these, the differences between the characters, how they speak, how they move. But commedia performances are improvised, and the performances are based on what is called a scenario. It's an idea, it's an outline. Let's let this scene be about this. And these stock characters, who all have a standard, normal way of performing and responding to various things, will fall right into that scenario and they play it, and it becomes this wonderful, entertaining, comedic performance. Um, One interesting thing about commedia performances is that the language that they speak is gibberish. It is nonsensical language. Gamelan is what they call it. And there is a video that discusses that too. Um, Commedia, the tradition of commedia is long lasting. It was popular. It was outdoor entertainment. And one important thing that I have not mentioned in these lectures this morning is the fact that theater was an art form that was practiced and attended primarily by men. The ancient Greeks, performances, all men. They wore masks, so women would be portrayed by men in a mask. The same thing happened in the 17th century with Shakespeare's theater. Men performed women's roles. All of the roles, the classic roles of women in Shakespeare's plays, were originally performed by young boys. They were members of Shakespeare's acting company. In the Italian tradition of commedia dell'arte, women performed. They were members of the acting troupe. So, of those stock characters, several of them were women. Um, Commedia was not the only form of theater performed in Italy during the Renaissance. Um, Carlo Goldoni, a playwright who, in the Italian tradition of commedia, wrote a play called The Servant of Two Masters. Funny, comedic, very fast paced, energetic in the tradition of commedia. Because commedia performances were improvised, there wasn't a lot to write down or to record or to save for future. Most of what we see of commedia is told in traditional performances that go back to that standard form that we saw. Now, in France, the French wanted to make sure that France became the cultural center of Europe. And for that reason, it was important for the French to put some guidelines to the writing of dramatic literature, rules, if you will. They called this the neoclassical ideal. And there were several rules that they felt that dramatic literature had to follow. Your text lists these rules and talks about them in detail. Um, but to basically give you an idea, it was important for, according to the neoclassical ideal, in terms of structure, the play could either be a comedy or a tragedy, never mixed. Comedies dealt with lower and middle class characters, while tragedies dealt with the wealthy and the nobles. All plays should be written in 5 acts. All plays should uphold the unities of time, place, and action. This goes back to the classical teachings of Aristotle, who said that all plays had to be unified in that way. Time. All of the action of the play has to take place within 24 hours, from sunup to sundown. Place. There can only be one location for the action of the play. And action being the plot, there could only be one plot line. All characters had to behave in a manner that was appropriate to their social class. This was called decorum. You would never see a royal or a wealthy individual in a bar engaged in a fistfight. That just was not appropriate to that status, that class. Finally, all plays had to uphold poetic justice, which meant that by the end of the play, good had to win out over evil. These restrictions were demanding, strict. And if you wanted to be recognized as a playwright, at least up to the standard of the French, you had to follow the neoclassical ideal. One French playwright um, became extremely popular during this time at the end of the 17th century and or the beginning of the 17th century, and that was Moliere. French playwright celebrated by King Louis was had a very interesting background. I encourage you to read about Moliere. Um, uh, he also had an acting company with women in the company. They performed his plays. Um, and one of his most popular plays is a play that deals with religious hypocrisy. It is a comedy, and it is called Tartuffe, Tartuffe. Your text talks about it a good deal. I'll be back.